Bem-vindos ao Cibertema de novembro do Centro Nacional de Cibersegurança, desta vez ligado às diferenças socioeconómicas, e a pergunta que se coloca neste Cibertema é: estará a cibersegurança ao alcance de todos? Este Cibertema será feito em inglês e, portanto, dentro de momentos eu irei fazer a troca da língua para inglês, mas desde já agradecer a presença de todos os assistentes e também aos nossos convidados, a doutora Rikke Jensen e doutora Tiago Lapa, que certamente nos irão apresentar os seus pontos de vista sobre este tema. Vou agora passar a fazer o switch para inglês deste cibertema, e antes de fazer esta mudança, qualquer questão, dúvida ou algum comentário que queiram fazer aos oradores durante esta sessão, poderão colocá-las na janela de chat, que será depois transmitido oportunamente no final das apresentações aos colegas. A sessão terá dois momentos: um momento que fará parte do momento das apresentações dos nossos oradores, e um segundo momento em que abriremos a sessão ao público com as suas questões e comentários, e pedindo aos oradores que intervenham com as suas opiniões e com as suas visões acerca daquilo que se pretende discutir no presente cibertema. So I'm switching to English right now. I would like to thank Professor Rikke Jensen from the Royal Holloway University from London. I think I did it correctly. She is a social scientist, an ethnographer. He has an extensive research in this area. She collaborates and participates in several projects related to migratory events and migratory things. She will explain it better later on. And she she's a lecturer in the Royal Holloway University in London. She has a PhD in communication and research, in media research, from the University of Westminster, and she will be having a talk about regarding these movements of migratory movements, and she will pass us on the point of view of their point of view in this case. So Tiago Lapa is a professor from the ISCTE, I think. She is a doctor in sociology. He was a professor. He's a professor from the University of Lisbon, and also he was a professor from the Polytechnic Institute of Leiria, if I understood it correctly. And he also has an extensive curriculum in this study. So I think we're going to have two very interesting talks in this area. So without further delay, I will pass the stage to Professor Rikke and put on her presentation, and hopefully everything goes well. Thank you one more time for your time, and let's see if we can have a great discussion over here. Professor.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I thought I understand some words as well in Portuguese, so that was quite reassuring. But also thank you very much for doing this in English. That certainly benefits me. I will try and, of course, be as clear as I can. So, and thank you for the invite to talk to you about this area, which is quite close to my heart. It's kind of where I do my research at these intersections of ethnography, social science, and security research, information security specifically. And I'm particularly interested in how security is experienced, practiced, and the security needs that are held at the margins of society. So that's what I will be talking about today, and I'll use some examples to do that. I'll try and keep it brief because I think it's cooler is to have a discussion as well and to hear what your interests are, and then we can talk around that. But yeah, so as the title very clearly says, you know, I'm going to be talking about kind of these social foundations, so to speak, of information security. So I'm not so interested in the technological aspects, whilst the technological really play into this, of course, but I'm really interested in the underpinnings, the social underpinnings, if you will, of what makes information security. So without further ado, I'm going to try to move my slides on, and that worked. Excellent. So before I speak about some examples and give you some examples to kind of concretize some of these thoughts that I'm kind of talking about, I thought I'll give you an overview of why does this even matter? You know, why should we think about these social foundations? Why do we care? What is it that is challenging in this perspective? So that's why I kind of thought this is a good way of kind of introducing some of these ideas. And the picture here is it's from some of the research I'll be talking about as well, with seafarers on board container ships in European waters. So as the introduction just said, I'm an ethnographer, so my work is really about going out and living with, immersing myself in the social practices and with the people and with the groups that I am studying. So it's very much an immersive, extended, long-term commitment to some of these groups, communities that I'm working with at the margins of society more generally. So this is a piece of work from a couple of years ago, I think 3 years ago, on some container ships. So I just wanted to kind of, I think it gives a good picture of kind of the kind of work that I do. So yeah, so why should we care about these security needs that are held amongst groups and populations at the margins of society? Why should we think about this in terms of the technologies that we design? Why does it matter? Well, my argument would be that it matters because we have very diverse security needs. So some of these security needs might be very specific to our social context, might be very specific to the kind of higher risk nature, potentially what we do. It might also be related to the relations that we have with others, with society, with particular institutions. So it's a way of recognizing and understanding and ways of exploring the diversification of diverse security needs that are held at different parts of society that I'm interested in. And these are not often recognized in information security when we design technologies, because they are based on often intuition of technology designers, rather than actually grounded in the everyday practices of people. And that's really where my research comes in. We also know from existing work, not only mine, but a broader body of work, that the information security needs of these higher risk or other marginalized groups of people are not well understood, and hence not well understood, also not well served by the technologies that people rely upon, that we all rely upon. So it kind of doesn't cater to or meet their security needs. So that's another, I think, underpinning reason why we should care and try to understand what those needs actually are. And also the kind of work that is done with this in the broader social sciences suggests that there are very distinct needs held around security at the marginalization, at the margins of society, particularly around higher risk and different groups. And therefore, I would argue it's important that we ground our explorations in those needs, trying to understand how people perceive security and what people actually do. So I think a lot of thinking is around how people might do, but actually, what do people actually do? And hence, that's also, I think the picture shows that actually immersing yourself in those everyday environments really tells us, can be a way of observing what people actually do rather than what people say they do. And that's a big difference. Hopefully we can have a conversation around as well in terms of how do we actually get to some of these perspectives. Because security is a really difficult topic to talk about if you're not a specialist, and you often get to the wrong people when you want to talk about security, because we want to talk to people who don't think they know anything about security, but of course we all do, because we do security every single day, all of us, without thinking about it. So that's what I would, hopefully we can have a discussion about that as well. So yeah, so ultimately, as the last sentence says here, it's really about grounding those security needs in the actual specific social settings of people. And these might be quite diverse settings. And that's where I kind of want to take a few examples to kind of share some of the insights from the work that we've, not only me, but with collaborators as well, been doing over the last few years in this area. I should say I not only work with social scientists, of course, I also work with technologists, cryptographers, system security designers across the different divides, so to speak. So a few research examples. I'm just going to see, I mean, I'll do definitely two, and maybe we'll do a third one as well to see how we go for time. I'll try to keep it brief, but hopefully we can then pick up any questions specific about the context that I'm talking about. So the first one is, and I think perhaps some of the people in the room might already have heard me talk about this. I think Lara potentially has, but work with some of the work we did a few years ago with refugees and migrants who were coming from particular Syria, but also different parts of the world to Sweden. And what was interesting in this, and this was done with collaborators here in Information Security Group. And one of the things we were really interested in was trying to understand what role does the mobile phone play in people's engagement with, access to the new land, so to speak, right? So what does actually, how do people think about the role of technology, the role of security, and how they do security in this new land, and where you suddenly have to rethink your wider security perspectives. You know, you are now potentially in you kind of maybe fled from a hostile environment where actually doing the right security for you is a matter of life and death. Suddenly you arrive in a country where, in order to get access to certain services like housing or language school, you have to give up some of your details, you know, information that you have kept private because they could be used against you. Suddenly you end up in a country where actually, in order to get access to essential services, you need to give up that information. So what we kind of did here, we got people to talk about their experiences. We asked them some questions. They worked in groups, as you can see this picture, worked in groups of telling their story, sharing their stories, drawings around the importance of the mobile phone. And I really like, I don't know, hopefully you can see this clearly as well, the picture that is at the top with the floating person with the big device that replaces their head. They really talked about how technology was an integrated part of life as a refugee in their context. So, and there are stories around how they're very aware that their security practices weren't meeting the standard practices they're being told to follow. But actually for them at this particular moment, security was to be able to contact people back in Syria that they had left behind. And therefore some of their practices weren't what some specialists like me, for example, would consider security. But for them, it was security to be able to contact and help people on their journey. That was security. Then it didn't matter whether their information was secure or not. What really mattered was the security of the people that left behind. So we had many stories that came out through this work where people say, look, I know this is not the best way of doing security, but right now, this is security for me. And I think that's often what we miss. We kind of miss some of these underpinnings of that security is dynamic, is temporal, it changes, and is conditioned on the context within which we experience it. So that's I think a neat way of getting also people to talk about security through some of these group practices and creative engagements that we use there. So I kind of want to just highlight that as one example, and we can pick this up hopefully in a discussion as well. The next piece of research, and it ties in, all of these tie together, so hopefully this isn't a complete jump from one to the other. There's a lot of underpinnings, of course, a lot of detail and nuances in each of these examples that we can hopefully bring out as well. In addition to kind of this journeying that we experience with the refugees, some of the, as I mentioned before, the work that I do is very grounded in the populations I study over time. And so some of this work in particular looked at what security and practices of security looked like and felt like amongst seafaring communities. So how do people who are at sea for up to 9 months at a time, who are stuck, in inverted commas, on a container ship, in this case, for not up to 9 months, as I said, at a time, how do they do security? And knowing that they have very little access to the digital technology, but also to Wi-Fi or other means of communication. So one of the things that really came out in this piece of research, and that really shows the significance of digital technologies and the importance of being able to contact home and communicate with people at home, family and friends, was that they would find ways to connect regardless of where they were in the world. So if they were close to land, they would try to pick up phone signals, for example, because there wasn't any onboard Wi-Fi connections. So they would find ways of, if they knew that, let's say at 3 o'clock in the morning, they would be close, the ship would be close enough to land. Hence, they would find ways of putting an alarm, even if it was during rest hours, they will put an alarm and say, I need to be up at 3 a.m. because I can then connect with family and friends. So there were these kind of very interesting practices that for them was security that they could be able to talk to their family. That gave them a sense of security. It wasn't about security of technology. It was about the security that they were given, were provided through being able to connect with family and friends. So I think, again, this kind of connects quite neatly with the other populations that we considered before, with refugees and migrants, and their ability to kind of help people that were on their journey to the new land, so to speak. So we kind of see some of these overarching connections. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because we often get told that it's not, inverted commas, profitable to design for marginalized communities because they're such a small part, if you will. They are margins, right? They're not the mainstream. However, what we can see that there are some of these shared security goals, shared digital practices across diverse populations that we don't necessarily connect otherwise. So I think this is a really interesting, for me at least, insight. So hopefully we can also talk more about some of these. And I just, so there are many of these, of course, there are many of populations that are remote, that are mobile, and hence are constantly in and out of connectivity, constantly being restricted, whether or not you can, be in constant contact, etc. So what does that do to our security perspective? I think is a really important question. So I would just raise like a broader notion here that when we think about some of these so-called marginalized or at risk or remote, geographically dispersed populations, that actually they share some of the security goals across these bigger divides. And perhaps we can design for them and think about their needs. I think I'm probably talking a lot, so I'm going to keep the last one quite short as well. The last one just very brief, because it's the most recent work that we did. This is collaborative work with cryptographers here in the information security group, where we looked at higher risk users, particularly protesters. We focused on Hong Kong, the anti-ELAP protests in Hong Kong, where we spoke to them about their security practices, particularly around messaging applications. So how do you use, what are the security practices that enable you to feel secure during these protests? And what was really clear was that a lot of the practices had nothing to do with the technology, although they used the technology. And what was also really clear was that their security needs were not met by the technologies that they were relying upon. So it was a big finding from this piece of work, and this is ongoing. So I won't spend time too much talking about it, but I just wanted to highlight this, that we're talking about margins, we're talking about underserved communities, we're talking about higher risk populations or at-risk populations that in some ways share different sorts of security goals, that perhaps we could rethink the ways in which we design and think security technologies. it doesn't mean that the technologies we currently rely upon don't meet needs. Of course they do. You know, we have great technologies, but perhaps there are ways in which we can match up needs and designs in a different way in some cases. So that's really what I wanted to say. The last slide is just a thank you. I think this kind of work that I do will never be possible if it wasn't for everyone who was engaged in it, who gave their time to take part of it. So, but yeah, raising these questions, these different examples, hopefully we can bring up in a broader discussion. But I think I've talked too much now, so I will say thank you, and I think I'll probably let Tiago take over. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
I will change the presentation right now, okay? Okay, sorry. Professor?
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and also thank you for the kind invitation to be here today. My research has to do with digital divide and inequality, especially in Portugal, and also in a comparative perspective with other European societies. Well, Portugal is characterized as a country within the European context with lower access and use of the internet, but also we have different levels of inequality. But the general population uses the internet nowadays, but the digital divide is more visible among older people, and that's the issue. But we can say that in Western societies, the problem is not access by itself, but it's basically the kind of access that people have to technology, but also information and knowledge gap. And that's the problem. We have big inequalities in terms of literacy, digital literacy, and that includes, of course, considerations about security and security behavior or cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is actually a concept that social scientists regard as a social construct. And that's also what I want to say with this presentation. I think it's an ever-evolving concept, in the sense that it shouldn't be regarded as a merely technical concept, and also because of technological or techno-social change, it's unclear what kind of practices should we include in the concept of cybersecurity. So can you change the slide? Oh, okay, so the concept of digital inequality or digital divide is an old one by standards of internet studies, and some authors actually make the difference between legacy inequalities and emergent forms of inequalities. And probably we could include in these emergent forms of inequality, inequality in terms of security practices or using digital platforms and digital devices. And we have a lot of societal challenges that have to do with platform economy, with wider use of digital labor, which was something that became clear with the public health crisis that we lived in the past years, but also challenges of automation, big data, or data, the Internet of Things, the use of algorithms. This reality actually poses some poses some risks in terms of using digital devices. So we can probably talk about digital inequalities 2.0 that have to do with these the changing techno-social environment, and we can actually think of digital inequalities in terms of layers, or a digital inequality stack, where we have multiple layers that must work together. And the end user of technology should be a big part of that stack. And it should include not just considerations about access and use, but also considerations about literacy, digital literacy, or even cybersecurity literacy, which are unevenly spread across society. So can you change the, yeah, so as I said, when we consider the concept of digital inequality, I guess we to think about different layers and maybe differentiate between what are legacy inequalities, basically in terms of access and such, but new technologies, new inequalities in terms of knowledge, skills, and practices. So we have still connectivity inequalities, although the general population might have access to technology. The quality of access isn't the same. We have device inequalities. I even have a personal history in terms of a personal event that happened to me because I had an older device, an older smartphone. I couldn't actually update the system, the operating system of the device. And then I asked for a housing credit to buy a new home. And one of the conditions to have access to the credit was to install the application of the bank. But I couldn't because my operating system wasn't up to date, and I couldn't because my device wouldn't let me do the update. So I have to buy a new phone. And this is, and for me, it was quite astonishing. Why do I need to install an application, have an up-to-date device and operating system to use a e-banking service? But this is an example of device inequalities, but also inequalities that have to do today with software applications, cybersecurity, and other paid services that include antivirus software, firewall, and so on. So the next slide, please. So yeah, we can say that there is a social construction of cybersecurity. There are different discourses around cybersecurity, and also we should include different stakeholders. So this is far beyond the technical discourse, although maybe in society at large, people might regard cybersecurity as something that should be provided by institutions, should be provided by IT professionals, and not something they should know or that should do personally when using digital devices. Probably maybe there are some attitudes regarding that, and in society that is a technical problem, not a social problem. But also there is this indefinition in terms of what can we include in the concepts of cybersecurity? Should we include all sorts of cyber risks like identity theft or cyber fraud or cyber harassment, cyberbullying? Can we include these practices inside the concept of cybersecurity, or should they be left out in that concept? But this is just an example of the concept is probably changing, and the awareness around this concept might change. Also because attitudes and representations of what cybersecurity might change, but also because there are new challenges, new technological challenges, and also in the consumer market. For instance, the Internet of Things and the Internet of Toys might actually provide a series of new risks for consumers. And consumers, when buying or using a certain service, might not be aware of the risks associated with that service, with that product. I mean, for instance, toys that are linked to the internet, they can be hacked. Some of those toys have cameras, and those cameras and the connections to the internet can be hacked, and these cameras can be used by hackers to invade the privacy of people who actually bought these products and devices. But anyway, so the next slide. As an evolving concept, it has different fields of acting, not just for national defense, for international, for internal security, but also in the next slide, it's something that is needed for the efficient work of the marketplace and to protect consumers and to protect individual rights in terms of their privacy and data protection. So I would ask to change the slide. Okay, so it is very important for the efficient functioning of e-commerce. Portugal is still far behind many European partners in this regard, but also e-commerce has been or the e-commerce practices have been rising also because of the COVID-19 crisis, where people buy online, but it's an environment where user trust is very important, and awareness that risks can be mitigated, it's very important. And actually, probably Portuguese consumers are very, they don't trust much. They don't trust much new platforms and digital platforms. Probably that's one of the explanations why e-commerce practices in Portugal are lower than the European average. But it's really important to instill trust in users. Bad experiences can affect tremendously user trust in using digital platforms. So it's really also a social and economical problem, and is linked with development factors. But also there's the problem of privacy, personal data protection, and freedom of expression. It's not just a societal problem, it's an individual problem of how people use technologies. And we can have further inequalities in terms, not just in terms of awareness, but also in terms of actual practices when using technologies. So next slide. So we have an evolution of the concept. First, it started as a concept for the integrity of systems. Then it's a concept of cybersecurity that has to do with internal security, fighting cybercrime, but also is being regarded as a concept in terms of national security, There is an event in 2017 when there was an attack in Estonia. Estonia is a state that uses extensively electronic services in terms of the ways of engaging with citizens and in ways of the state or in how the state operates. And this is a big problem for if you have a whole system that is coupled with technologies, and if there is an attack on the system, that can be a threat to the whole system. I mean, critical services might not work. So it can pose a problem in terms of national security, but also in providing services for citizens. But we can say that the concept is changing also for the emergency, for the development of new risks that are coupled with new technologies. So in the next slide. We have here different issues: cyber risk, cyber fraud, identity theft, cyber harassment, bullying, addiction, also all sorts of illegal activities on the dark web, but also individual risks. And the question is if we should include all these problems or risks in the wider concept of cybersecurity. And again, we can ask, what is cybersecurity? And if cybersecurity includes all this, how this can actually provide new layers of inequality that can be explained by social economical differences. So this digital risk society might be producing new risks, might be producing new layers of cybersecurity. And in terms of thinking about cybersecurity, it's not just a matter of the integrity of systems, of the efficiency of the marketplace, the electronic marketplace, or the efficiency of government operations, but also has to do, or might have to do, with human rights and privacy. And in this regard, it's not just a social legal problem at the macro level, but can be regarded also as a problem at the micro level. And in terms of citizenship and how people actually exercise their rights, but that is coupled with uneven distribution of literacy, and maybe public policy should also follow that. Okay, maybe I should shut up for now and let the discussion also begin. And maybe with further questions, we can provide other answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I will start now with the questions from the public. So I was before the questions of the public, I was astonished with some of your sentences, from some of the sentences that you both stated during the presentations. The first of all is that I pointed out some of them over here. I will not. I will try to do some considerations in the presentations. The first one was to look at the masses. Normally, cybersecurity looks at the masses, not at the details. I think that it was pointed out with your two presentations regarding the looking at the socioeconomic differences in cybersecurity and security in overall. And also, I had, as a technical guy, I had a very straight definition of security and cybersecurity. What you're saying is there is no definition of cybersecurity, nor the definition of security. It depends of the culture, it depends of the moment, and it also depends of the socioeconomic and of the literacy of the people. So I was astonished to do that. So it's my personal contribution to this cyber theme. So and I have one of the two questions, personal questions, regarding the digital divide and the digital illiteracy. They have a direct impact in the overall society. So how can we fight a problem that is stated in our communities? We cannot say that we are a mass community. We have differences between people. We have differences between cultures. We have differences between technology and the driving from the technology guys, the guys from technology to put on to use the state-of-the-art technology, to use the services and to use this kind of digital services. That is a problem from the socioeconomic point of view. So how can he fight this? How can he, in some way, create some steps to diminish the gap between the reality and the utopic world of everything is digital, and it's these questions and that I have to put it into discussion, and also I will try to not to be very conservative in the way of speaking, but also we have a geopolitical moment over here that is also probably a resistance to the change, and will be creating greater gaps in the future, because we have a war in Ukraine, we have an energetic problem, we have the climate change, we have migration problems, we have things that are augmenting the gap between and augmenting the socioeconomic differences between people, and in the cultures that they are being exterminated in some cases. So what is your opinion about this, both of you, and how can we fight this, not only from the technical point of view, but also from the sociological point of view? I think, can you create more cyber hygiene or more education about this? Can we try to put this in how can you put this into the people's minds, that security should be a term that should be harmonized between the world. So I will leave it to your opinion, and I'll pass the stage to you. Thank you. I thank you one more time for your presentations. That they will be very interesting in this case. So I will pass it on to you. So I will be shutting up. So thank you.
I don't know. I mean, Tiago, I mean, I can start, and then maybe you can kind of pitch in. I'm sure. So I think, sure. Yeah. So you kind of, I don't disagree. We design for the masses. That's also where money is, right? So the market also drives, the ways in which we design technologies, because we need, sell products, etc. I would argue, though, that if we actually understood the margins, as we're talking about here, or different divides, as Tiago was talking about, we might actually not be designing for the masses. First of all, that might be a question that we could discuss. I think also one thing about actually understanding the significance of some of these questions is that by having conversations like these, by also, I think that there's a red herring in the word cyber, because it becomes a specialized, it becomes alienating, it becomes something that doesn't matter to me, because that's what I meant about expertise, that it becomes this sensationalist, shiny, high-tech issue, and I think it's alienating. I don't think it's helpful, and for any conversation. And when I said before, we all do security every single day, my security is different from your security. That goes across. And I think if we actually need to rethink the way we just talk about security, the rhetoric around information, cybersecurity, digital security, whatever we would like to call it, I think that's really important. I also think that whilst I think a top-down policy approach can do some of the work, I really struggle to see how that gets to some of these communities who already are resisting some of the top-down policy approaches that are being rolled out, because we won't get to people that are already at the margins and therefore already resist some of the changes, as you also mentioned. So I would have to say we have to, and it's going to be a typical academic response, that is actually about rethinking, re-engagements with the people we actually want to serve. And it might mean that I won't say bring technologies to the field, but it's actually about conversations across. Whilst we heard a lot about interdisciplinarity in our fields, and I'm sure, Tiago, you'll have the same, the problem with that is we kind of sit in between, right? We kind of like, we all do a bit of everything. And I actually think we need really strong technologists. I really want to make that very clear. We need technologists who can do the kind of work that actually serves the needs of people. But in order to serve the need of people in technology terms, we first need to understand what those needs actually are. And I really think that rather than a race to the bottom, it's about slow re-engagements and understanding. And this is a really non-answer. I hope Tiago has a much better response to this. But I really think it is, because I think it's so easy to talk about access. But the problem with access is we don't know how to benefit from the access, right? Some of these communities just don't benefit from it. You know, putting a piece technology in a village, in, you know, somewhere in a rural community, that's an alien object, right? That's alienating already. That's not part of our culture. So how can we have these conversations in these contexts? And I would, whilst my work is super nuanced and super small, it's not sensationalist at all. Unfortunately, I would like to be. Hopefully, having some of these smaller, beginning to have these conversations gradually, we'll also have conversations that brings it to the surface of technology, because we really need strong technologists as well that can design these technologies. But the last thing I will say, and then I think we're making a massive mistake in the way we think sometimes the role of social science in technology design is that it becomes an application problem. We go out and we do user studies, right? So the technology is assumed, the technology is already done, security is already finished. You know, we know how to do security. Hence, we go out and we apply security to the world for a better world. I think that's wrong. I think we need to start the other way around. We first need to ask the questions: what technologies do we need? What do we want? And then we design the technologies. And I think this idea that, you know, AI for social good, or I don't know, security or cryptography for social good is a wrong approach, because it assumes that the technology is flawless. And that I would challenge. That was my last word.
Yeah, well, I agree. I agree with Rikke. I think we should actually rethink the concept of security or cybersecurity. It's security. It is. So with just different technological tools, but we're talking about security. And also, there are a lot of problems with the expression cyber, of course. It seems that there is that the social world is divided in two, between the real and the cyber, the real and the virtual. That's a digital dualism that doesn't make sense, especially nowadays. So it is a matter of security, and yes, there is a risk of alienating people around these issues, and I completely agree, and I also agree with the notion. That's why I talked about different stakeholders, and the role of social science and ethnographers, seeing how people actually use technology, what their actual practices with direct observation, and that should be included in the design of technology and systems. So I completely agree with that. It not just as an add-on, okay, let's implement security measures and then let's see the outcome on how people use technology. It should be the other way around. It should, by design, technologies should fit people's needs for security in general. So I completely agree. But there's also challenges for public policy, not just in the terms you use and the kind of programs you provide. Probably the work with children should be done not just in the technical sense, but also challenging notions that children are digital natives. They know what they're doing when they're using technology or other groups, especially children. So we should fight this notion of digital natives, of a younger generation that can use proficiently technologies by default. That's not true. But also there are challenges in terms, and that should be included probably in the curriculum, digital literacy that not just includes the technical aspects, but also the social aspects, because digital technologies are not just complex in technological terms or technical terms, but also in social terms. But there's also challenges in terms of the terms you use as a common taxonomy that isn't alienating for people, in terms of information sharing, in terms of situational awareness, or what are the best practices when using technology, mutual validation of processes, of procedures. That doesn't exist even in public administration or inside institutions. And it should include not just IT staff, of course, but everyone. So everyone should be part of this. There is still much to do in terms of public policy, of standardization, certification, a lot of training and awareness. Simple things like using email and using your personal account of Gmail to actually, if you are a civil servant, to communicate. You shouldn't do that. You should actually use proper channels to do that. In terms of reactions, in terms of even research and development, that should be, again, and here I underline what Rikke said, interdisciplinary, and also should include a bottom-up perspective of what are actually people's needs, to understand their attitudes, representation towards security or cybersecurity, but also their actual practices. And how can we include that by default and during the design phase of security systems? Yeah.
I wonder whether I could just very, very briefly, because I agree everything with Tiago was just said, just as an example, perhaps to concretize some of these broader notions is, so there's been some, not my work, but there's been done work with refugees in the US, for example. So if you think because you mentioned email, so we also assume that the kind of devices that people use resemble the devices that we use. We kind of assume that people know how to use emails. In some cultures, actually, is a mobile phone that is mainly used. I've never seen an email exchange before. Then you come somewhere and you're kind of saying, actually, everything is done through email. That's also then limiting your sense of security, because then suddenly you've been asked to use something you're not used to. Also, the kind of password is always a good example, right? Because it's kind of laughed at some point, but also it becomes the kind of the main driver of some of the security advice. And what we also find is that the ways we're asked to generate passwords in some cultures, birthday doesn't matter. No one actually, I can't remember what birthday my firstborn child is, because it doesn't matter in my culture. It's not a thing, or so we also base these kind of security requirements based on our own cultural assumptions, and these are assumptions. And that's also what comes out in some of this research, not only my own, as I said, but a lot of this research that's beginning to engage with some of these communities. So anyway, that was just an example to kind of concretize some of the stuff that Tiago and I both.
Yeah, sorry, Antonio, let me just make a question. Following what you both said, and I totally agree with, on my daily basis, I hear that people are the weakest link. And so if security is not meeting my needs, is this correct? Do you both agree with this? And I think it's kind of interesting to make this question in a room. I know Rikke's perspective, and that's why I made this question. I always know how tricky this can be. And I think it's interesting to also hear Tiago and Antonio's point of view, because Antonio is here the technical guy, and normally we hear these that people are the weakest link from the technical side of it. So I would like to know your perspective. Thank you.
Just let me just complement this. I think that there are 3 or 4 big words or big buzzes over here that we've talked about. It's the responsible introduction of technology into the population. So it's the responsible use and by default. I heard the word by default, but it clicked in my hair, and the security and cybersecurity by default. I also think that if you start to looking at the term cybersecurity, I will lose my job in a short time, because it's correct. The term cybersecurity should be probably think in terms of cultural ways and in terms of the use of technology and the introduction of technology. The question is if you want to put the technology in the service of people, there is a need to have some public policies. Obviously, there is a need to have awareness and training and probably education about this technology. But the question is, do we need that technology in the service of the people? I think that is very interesting. And the third word, one of the words, is the term dependability. Do we need to have some trustability and dependability in this kind of technology, to use it correctly, and to have a mass use and a common use of this technologies that are being included in our day-to-day basis. And this is I think it's, in my opinion, it's the big problem is, do we need to have technology put in the favor of people every day if you don't know how to use it? It's the same thing that I have to have a Ferrari in my home and then I don't have a driver's license. I can have it, but I don't know how to drive it, and I will spend a lot of money to have it. But that's a problem. So.
But what's the weakest link there? Is the Ferrari, or is it you? You know, I mean, who do you think is wrong?
I think the problem is that what is the weakest link? What is the weakest to have dependability? So sorry for exchanging the way of the question, but trying to step out of the socioeconomic, but it's related. So.
But to answer you, Lara, I myself used that expression in the past, but it's not really productive or goes against what we said here, actually. Because saying that people is the weakest link, it's like saying, okay, well, the system is perfect, but the problem is people. And if you apply that to a whole social system, you know that has some implications. It's wrong to assume a duality or a separation between the system and people, and that the system is perfect. The system should and includes people, so it's part of the system. The system is not perfect; it's not going to be perfect, and of course, people their skills, their practices are a layer and a part of the system. And the system should be thought and designed with people in mind. So if there are breaks in security, it's not that people failed and the system still remains intact. It's the whole system that is compromised. So, no, I think it's wrong, really, and public policy shouldn't follow that idea and that assumption that people is the weakest link. And probably people could have, again, a lot of useful insights to improve how systems are designed. So people shouldn't be regarded as the weakest link or they should be regarded as actually partners in designing systems, basically, security systems.
Yeah, I don't think I need to add to that. I very much agree. I think it's a wrong starting point if we begin to think about human people, not even forget about human, but people as the weakest link. As Tiago says, counterproductive. But I also think it takes away agency from people because actually people do their own security. And as I mentioned before, my security is different from yours, and who's to tell me that my security is wrong? Because actually what gives me security right now is that, not that my password is secure, but actually that I can quickly go in and buy something because actually that feeds my child or something like that. So I really, really think this is, we're starting from a wrong proposition if we think of people as the weakest link. I think I start all my lectures with let's get this over with, because I know you all come in with, you think people are problems.
That's true.
Yeah, Lara, you know, it's like that's the first sentence in my lecture. Now let's deal with this, because otherwise we'll spend 10 weeks just coming back to it. So, yeah, so I think that's on a serious note, I think it is a problem. I would also just coming back to the Ferrari point, that kind of link. So I think one difference here is about digital dependability is that there's a question of choice, right? Do you have a choice to not depend on some of these systems? I think that's where also responsibility comes in from public bodies, from different stakeholders, is actually if we're building a society, and it's a decision to build a society, societies don't just like emerge, right? Societies are built in and constructed in a certain way. And if this is how we decide to build our society on these digital systems, which, you know, appears to be the case, then we better make sure that when people don't have a choice to opt out, if you want to be part of society, if you want to get benefits, if you want to, you know, be looked after by the so-called social system, you have to be digital. Then we also need to make sure that people have, to use your example, the driver's license. Right. So you can choose or not to have your Ferrari, but can you actually choose to be digital or not? I think is a question. So I wrote a paper a few years ago where I made the stupid mistake of talking about post-digital society and post-digital security. And that actually doesn't mean that digital isn't the thing. It means that digital is so integrated into everything we do. This makes no sense of actually talking about digital, non-digital, because actually digital is such a foundational part of what we do. So so I think then we have a responsibility, everything that Tiago said in that talk as well about the different divides that we're experiencing in literacy, in education, then there's a real responsibility on all of us really that sit here.
I think we have let's give a stage to the public also, and not to have this. I think we have a question from the public. Lara, if you want to put it on,
yeah, sure.
And we can try to answer them.
Sure. So we have here a question from Carlos Domingues, and Carlos asks the following: I would like to know if there are specific social or non-profit organization, national or European, that help people with low resources in specific scenarios where they are victims of online identity theft or online fraud. And he asks for some examples.
I can try to give the Portuguese example. We have in Portugal, we have the Safer Internet Center. It's called Centro Internet Segura, that is part of the National Cybersecurity Center also. And the APAV, the Associação Portuguesa de Apoio à Vítima, that is also part of the Safer Internet Center. So it helps, for example, in Portugal to deal with these problems and to cope with this with the judiciary, police, and the other members of the society that deals with this kinds. Also, in European level, there are the safer. I think that it's called the Safer Internet. That it's a cooperation between all the European safer internet centers that do this kind of work, and they also have dependencies of non-profit organizations in their countries that do this this kind of deal with this kind of problems. So this is are the ones that we deal in the daily basis. Probably Tiago and Rikke know other ones, but these are the ones that we in the National Cybersecurity Center work in the daily basis in these cases. So I don't know if Tiago or Rikke want to put some more in this question, more information regarding this question.
Well, I'm also a member of the advisory board of
Yes.
Safe Internet Center. Yeah. But probably the activities of the Safe Internet Center are probably too much focused on young people, which of course is an important target. There has been a discussion within the advisory board to actually broaden the scope of intervention, awareness, events, and so on, and to include actually not just low income or people with low resources, but well, of course, you can here include cultural literacy resources. So, but I think it is important to actually broaden the scope of the events within the action of the Safe Internet Center. But and there's all, of course, APAV, but there's nothing specific. Maybe it's an idea. Maybe I think civil society could also organize itself to, and it's just a question of human rights at the moment, and to have to actually exercise your citizenship. We're talking about the evolution of human rights, of course, that should include considerations about security online, and yeah, I think that's an idea even for national and European non-profit organizations. I think it will be a good idea for those organizations to flourish and to give further means for people to protect themselves.
Yeah, I think probably my input here would be less useful in this context, but I mean, we do have, of course, in a UK context, something called action fraud, for example, that kind of deal with some of these questions. I think more broadly, I would say, so this is not my work, but the PhD student that I'm supervising is working on this particular area, looking at the journey of victims of online fraud, and it's a really complicated journey. I think you kind of highlight that in your answers as well, that you know, what organizations serve, I think is a real question. And I think the relationship with law enforcement, the relationship with national bodies, the relationship with charities and NGOs, I think it's a very muddled and muddied, perhaps, area. So I think it's something that hopefully over coming years we'll also see more both research in and engagements with, because the relationship between like crime and actually some of these bodies, organizations, is not as clear. So if you start off, if you are a so-called victim of online fraud, or in any sense of an online, in inverted commas, crime, then where you go is actually quite challenging, and where you get support is really challenging. So trying to map this support network for victims of online crime is actually a challenge in itself. But, I mean, this is a UK context, so it might be very different from your context, from your perspective. But here it's a real murky water, and where to go. Even some of the law enforcement bodies don't even know what relationship they have with different NGOs and where they go and the relationship between the two. So yeah, it's a good question, because I'm not sure it's clear if you suddenly find yourself in this situation.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. I think that is a very interesting idea and a very interesting research project, because looking at the pathway of a victim and the swamp that they'll need to cross over to recover their identity and to recover her personal ego in some cases, and his personal physical identity in the real world it's in some cases it's proven to be a problem. It's very interesting to have a research project in this case. I think we don't have any more questions from the public, and it's more or less the time to end up our conversation. So I would like to one more time to thank you for this time. It was very productive for me. I was very interested to see not the technical stuff, but the problem that is underlying the culture and the acquaintance about the security and cybersecurity and all of these problems. And from this challenge that you sent, that we shouldn't look to the people as the weakest link, or not say that the people are the weakest link. Probably you should start to look at the whole ecosystem of digital and with people involved in this area. There are some initiatives around Europe and around the world that are trying to separate even further technology from the people, and that's probably they should be included and should be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I think that this buzzword is put the people in the solution, not put the people in the problem part. It's very interesting to look at this point of view and to see that we should not try to balance the problem with not looking at the masses, but also looking at the masses, including the small groups, and not put anyone aside. It's very interesting to see this, and to see that your opinion is more or less the same. It should be, but it was not arranged, but it conflicted at the same time. So thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully you're going to see you again in the shorter future. I will pass the stage for you and for the last remarks, and we'll end the cyber theme. And also thank you to the public that was listening to us, and also I would like to thank Clara for the questions and for the interest to be here listening to us in this case. Okay, thank you.
Let me just add and agree with Antonio said. It's such an honor for the National Cybersecurity Center to have you both here sharing your thoughts about this. And the main lesson learned here is that maybe you will not memorize everything you heard, but people are not the weakest link, and let's take into consideration them and their everyday context. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say thank you as well for the invite, and just maybe leave with this thought that, yes, I won't talk about the weakest link again, but think about the fact that when we design technologies, we model social relations. You know, you know, we do have Alice, we have Bob, we have Eve in security, right? So we do model social relations. However, how those social relations are modeled, I think, is the question. Do we ground those in the actual social relations or in the intuition of technology designers, security designers? I think that's the question. So that would be my last thought, but thank you very much. I enjoyed this very much. And,
leaving cryptography behind, you should put Alice talking to Bob without any technology in the middle.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you very much for the invite. Bye-bye.
Bye.